I am. How about yourself tonight, Ryan?
Good, very good. I mean, here we are. We're 51 days away, and, the goalpost has moved a little bit, right? We were down in the 30s, and then we jumped back to the 50s. But either way, if we get football, I'll be happy here in T-Town.
I'm in 100% agreement with you, and I think SEC fans they've been given the choice prior to, back in the spring, and they said, hey, how about 10 SEC games over the 8 SEC games you're scheduled for? I think everybody's hand would have shot up in the air.
Well, and Phil, let me ask you about that. When you try to project from 8 conference games to 10 conference games, how much harder will it be, even though we don't know the schedule, but adding a 10th conference game?
It's definitely going to make it more difficult. In fact, you go back and look at the middle-of-the-road SEC teams, the ones that generally go 3-1 or 4-0 in non-conference play, then can afford a 3-5 record in conference play and still make it to the postseason. I think that's going to be tougher now because you are going to have the teams with losing records if it's conference-only play.
Phil, when you look at Alabama, when I say just give me a general feeling of Alabama, they're number 3 in the latest USA Today coaches poll. Where do you have the Tide in the upcoming season? What's your analysis?
I have number 3 as well, and I think when you take a look at Alabama, the biggest question mark I have on the entire team is naturally quarterback. But Mac Jones, Bryce Young, a couple of capable guys, and surrounded by talent. They have my number 1 rated offensive line in the country, number 3 rated set of receivers, number 2 running backs. And I think the defense getting players like Dylan Moses and Joshua McMillan back going to be even stronger than last year. So Alabama's a clear national title contender.
Phil, what makes this offensive line the top unit in college football?
It's a compilation of the talent as well as the experience level. I like the fact that these 5 guys have all been working together. You got 3 guys that could easily have gone to the NFL, and Landon Dickerson, Deontay Brown, Alex Leatherwood all opted to return. Plenty of starting experience in a bunch. All the guys have size. All the guys were very highly touted coming out of high school. And, I'm a member of the Joe Moore Award Committee, and I bounced my top offensive lines off the committee, and nobody gave me a pushback whatsoever with having Alabama as the number 1 offensive line headed into the year.
You combine that with the front of the cover, and you like a little running back there. Alabama could get back to playing a little smash-mouth football with this backfield here in T-Town that led by Najee Harris.
Yeah, Najee Harris, clearly one of the best running backs in the game, averaged 5.9 yards per carry, also a threat out of the backfield. And then you add in a guy like Trey Sanders, who was my number 1 rated running back out of high school last year. Missed the year with injury. Brian Robinson has proved a very capable backup so far. Keelan Robinson comes in as a sophomore after rushing for 254 yards and a solid 6.5 yards per carry. And then naturally bring in a couple of 3 big true freshmen this year, McClellan, Edwards, and Williams. That's a big part of the reason I rate Alabama as the number 2 running back core in college football.
Does it really matter who's the quarterback, Mac Jones or Bryce Young?
It doesn't to me because I think if Mac Jones showed last year he's a capable QB, and Bryce Young, of course, gives you that number 2 rated quarterback out of high school, athlete, one everybody wants to see on the field. So whether they go with the guy that's got experience or they go with the guy that's uber talented, and that's not saying Mac Jones is not talented. Naturally he is. He's playing for Alabama. But I think that whichever way they go at quarterback, they're in great shape.
Phil, when you look at the SEC West, who do you have? Do you have obviously Alabama winning the SEC West? Who is the second-place team here?
Now, my second-place team is going to surprise you a little, Ryan, because it went out of the box there. I've got Texas A&M. And I'll take you back to a conversation I had with Coach Jimbo Fisher last year, going over the team with him. At that point, he had 2 great recruiting classes. He brought in a 3rd this year now. But going over the team with him, at the end of the conversation, 2 things really jumped out at me. Number 1, they had very few seniors on last year's squad, only about 4 or 5 seniors on the entire team. And the second thing that jumped out was they were about to play a brutal schedule. In fact, it turned out they played number 1 ranked Clemson, number 1 ranked Alabama, number 1 ranked LSU, who placed 3 number 1s in the same year, also number 4 Georgia and number 8 Auburn. And I told Coach at the end of the conversation last year, Coach, I'm going to put you on my national cover next year. Well, next year's here, and A&M's a lot more veteran team, 17 returning starters, including Kellen Mond. And you look at the schedule gets a lot lighter this year. They may only play 2 top 10 teams. So a better schedule, more experienced team. I think A&M's going to surprise a lot of folks this year.
What is LSU's expectation level there in Baton Rouge coming off of the championship?
My original reaction was, wow, they lose 14 guys, 14 draft picks, 20 guys the NFL overall. They lose a guy that threw 60 touchdown passes, lose your defensive coordinator to Baylor, lose your co-offensive coordinator to the NFL. This team's really going to struggle this year, but then much like Alabama, it looks like they're going to reload talent-wise because every position just loaded. I think they may even have better defense than they had last year, led by Tyler Shelvin up front. They had in a North Dakota State transfer and Jabril Cox at middle linebacker, so there will be a very good team this year. Now, are they going to average close to 50 points per game? Is their quarterback going to throw for 60 touchdowns like last year? No, but they still are a good team. I've got them coming in third in the SEC West.
Look at the Auburn Tigers within the state. What do you see from Gus's bunch this year?
Well, they always surprise me. Go back to last year. I thought Alabama and Texas A&M were going to beat them. They pulled upsets in both those games. And the strength last year for Auburn was at the line of scrimmage. They had one of the best offensive lines, one of the best defensive lines in the country. Now, their defensive line is still good. I just don't think it's up to last year's standards as they lose Marlon Davidson, they lose Derek Brown up front, and the offensive line, major question marks there, is basically all 5 starters head out the door. So I've got questions on the offensive line. But, of course, last year they had questions at quarterback. I think Bo Nix is going to be much more capable in second year. Last year struggled a little bit on the road, but overall had a surprisingly good season, and they've got some dangerous receivers. So it's a talented Auburn team. I think, as usual, they'll pull an upset or two ahead of my expectations. But overall, I picked them 4th in the West because they dropped down to number 100 on my experience chart after being number 59 last year.
When you look at Ole Miss and Mississippi State, 2 new coaches in that state, let's say that you and I, and we visit every year, and I've always enjoyed our chats to be able to tap into your expertise on the college football side. But let's say that you and I are talking 3 years from now. Who has the quickest success? Is it Mississippi State or is it Ole Miss with Lane Kiffin?
I'm going to go with Ole Miss, and for this reason. When you look at Ole Miss, they were set up freshman-wise. I mean, John Rice Plumlee, Jerry Neely, Snoop Connor, Matt Corral all played as freshmen last year. Jonathan Mingo, a wide receiver, Frosh. A couple of offensive linemen played as Frosh last year. So they had a really solid freshman class, and they're not drastically changing the schemes on offense and defense. They're making changes, but it's not drastic changes there at Ole Miss. Meanwhile, Mississippi State, this year they're inexperienced, but Mike Leach is coming in and drastically changing things. They go from a run-based offense, and let's face it, their quarterbacks were better known for running the football than throwing it. Now they're going to the pass-based. Mike Leach throws the ball at a higher percentage than any other coach in the country. That takes a couple of years to develop. Years of the offensive line learning how to pass block as opposed to run block and retooling everything. And I think it's going to take time for Mike Leach. You remember his first 3 years at Washington State, he had a losing record all 3 seasons, and I think he gets off to a slow start here at Mississippi State.
Let's go to the SEC Eastern side. Can in any way the Florida Gators close the gap on Georgia?
I think Florida's going to be the media pick to win the SEC East this year, potentially. They've got top 10 defense. They've got a quarterback in Kyle Trask who hadn't even started a game in high school and was thrown into the fire in college and had 25 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. They have a more veteran offensive line. And the one thing they have to work on a little bit is definitely the run game. There were games last year where they just didn't even try to run the football. Meanwhile, with Georgia, they have the best defense in the country, but they have question marks on offense. Offensive line, a little bit of a question mark with only 1.5 starters back there. They lose their top 2 running backs. They lose some talented receivers and their quarterback. But I like Jamie Newman. I like J.T. Daniels. I think both those guys, whoever wins the job, is going to do extremely well. Zamir White at tailback. And you look at the receiving corps. Last year's receiving corps lost everybody, so they're a more veteran group there. I'll take the team that's got the best defense in the country, so I'm going to go with Georgia to win the East. But Florida's right there, and like I said, could even be the pick by the SEC media.
There's a lot of hype in Knoxville, which is normal for the offseason, but even more so here in 2020. Are you buying the hype with Jeremy Pruitt's squad going into 2020?
I am this year, and it goes to my conversations with Coach Pruitt. In his first year there, he was coming from Alabama, and he was inheriting what they had at Tennessee, and he was not enamored with the overall talent level. And look what happened at Tennessee his first year. They not only lost 7 games, they lost 6 of them by 25 points or more. They weren't even competitive. Even last year, they lost to Florida by 31. Georgia, they lost to by 29 points. Alabama, they lost to by 22, probably closer in the final, but still lost by 22 points. So they were not competitive against the big boys. And once again, last year, Coach Pruitt wasn't super high on the team. This year, he likes the talent he's got coming back. He's got 17 returning starters, 3 recruiting classes, feels they have SEC caliber talent. And even back when they had Oklahoma on the schedule, I said, you're playing Oklahoma, Florida, Georgia, Alabama all in the same year. Can you compete with these guys? He said, Phil, there's not a team on the schedule I don't feel we can beat. So it's the most confident he's been in his 3 years. I clearly think Tennessee's in for a big upgrade this year. And they're coming in on a 6-game win streak, too, and that always helps.
And they found that confidence in Bryant-Denny Stadium. I mean, we were kind of shocked that, most teams kind of drift away a little bit, but they were able to go win out after the game here in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, and, a lot hinged on that play by Garantano at quarterback. He called an audible, tried to do the quarterback sneak, fumbled. Alabama returned it for a touchdown. All of a sudden, a 1-score game turned into a 3-score game. And then we saw a different Garantano after that. He didn't try any of those audibles anymore, became much more of a team player, and I think they really helped Tennessee.
Phil, before we go to the national spotlight, let's stop here and talk about the publication, the ways that we can get it. I'll tell you this, man, you almost threw a panic out there when we had read early on. Now, this was early on. This was in the month of June, and we were all trying to adjust, and we saw, this thing's not going to be published. Trust me, we were almost hitting the panic button here, but you were able to make some contracts and some negotiations, and now we've got it at newsstands. Tell us more how people can get the magazine, the guide that I bring into my studio every single day. Matter of fact, I've got last year's edition right here. I'm looking at Tua Tagovailoa, Trevor Lawrence, DeAndre Swift, and Shea Patterson on the cover. When you look at this year's copy, how can people get their hands on it?
Well, I appreciate that, Ryan. And, yeah, it is different this year in the fact that, like you said, back in March when they shut the state of Ohio down, I was coming into an empty office every day. I'm thinking, are we even going to put a magazine out? Thank goodness we did, and I got to talk to 110 to 130 head coaches out there. They got me fired up for the season, Ryan. Because they pretty much said, hey, don't worry about us not having spring practice. We'll be ready when they put the ball on the field. But what we also did was we reduced the amount of magazines we printed. We normally print a couple 100,000. This year we only did 50,000. So as opposed to being at every grocery store and bookstore out there, it's only available at 2 places, Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. That's the only 2 locations in the whole country that you can get the Phil Steele magazine this year. So don't drive all over the place looking for it. Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. I think there's quite a few Books A Millions in Alabama, I believe. And then you can also go online to philsteele.com. That's STEELE.com to pick up the magazine. But Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, philsteele.com are the only 3 places to get the magazine this year.
Now, there is an instant access, right? The electronic version. Is that still available?
That is. If you don't mind having, you don't need the hard copy, yes, it is absolutely available. If you go to philsteele.com and just go to the online go to digital magazine login, there you can get the digital magazine version. And once you download it to your iPad or iPhone or any of those devices, it's available on all 4 of the devices for you.
And it's available philsteele.com. If you want instant access, you can also order the copy there and also get in contact with everything that they're offering throughout the football season. They provide a lot of analytics. Barnes & Noble here in Tuscaloosa has the publication. Phil, let's go to Oklahoma. Spencer Rattler replaces Jalen Hurts, which we know a lot about. What are you expecting from Lincoln Riley there in Norman in 2020?
You know, the one thing that jumps out at me is Oklahoma might actually have a defense this year. They potentially have a top 20 defense, according to my numbers coming in, and that would be pretty exciting. And I expect Spencer Rattler just to be the next great quarterback at Oklahoma. I know he's not a transfer, but it is his second year in the system, whereas Jalen Hurts was in his first year of the system last year. Rattler was my number one rated quarterback coming out of high school. He's got all the tools. He's a natural thrower, and I think you're looking at another 4,000-yard passer thrown to the receiving core he's got. And I talked about offensive line for Alabama. How about offensive line for Oklahoma? Bill Bedenbaugh always produces a top-notch offensive line. Last year he had one returning starter. This year the unit's back almost entirely intact. They have my number 2 offensive line in the country. So take that potent offense, team it with a potential top 20 defense, and Lincoln Riley's made the playoff each of his first 3 years. I think he makes it a 4th straight year. He's got a shot to actually win the playoff game this year.
Phil, and I don't want to run into any other interviews, so I don't want to continue too much. I don't want to be hoggy over your time, but I'd love to spend a couple of minutes here in Clemson. They've become kind of an almost instant rival when you look at the Tigers. Dabo's group, what's the biggest question you have around the Tigers in 2020?
Biggest question is the offensive line, which has just one returning starter up front. And the second biggest question is wide receiver depth. After they lost Justin Ross, you look at their top guys, they're all very good, but they cannot really afford a lot more injuries at the wide receiver spot, or they get a little bit thin there. And the third thing that would probably bother me a little bit about Clemson this year would be they're playing a much tougher schedule. You go back to last year, it was Clemson, Grand Canyon, and then the rest of the ACC. In fact, I'm hard-pressed to name who the second-best team in the ACC was last year, whereas this year, Clemson's got Notre Dame has joined the conference. They also have a much-improved North Carolina, a much-improved Miami of Florida, a much-improved Virginia Tech, a much-improved Pitt. I think the ACC is the most improved conference in college football, and that's going to make Clemson's road to the playoff a little bit tougher than it's been the past couple of years.
Final question for Phil Steele. Phil, let's go to Eugene, Oregon, and talk about what Mario Cristobal's been able to do out there. What do you expect from the Ducks in 2020?
Well, they're going to be the favorites to win the Pac-12, and I love the way he's built this team. They used to be gimmick and speed on offense. Now they are power, and this team's got a defense. In fact, the Ducks have my number 6 rated defensive line in the country, number 13 rated linebackers, and the best secondary in the country. Their only question marks are pretty big ones. Justin Herbert's gone at QB, and they lose 4 of their starters on the offensive line. But the talent's clearly there for Oregon. I think if you're looking for a challenger in the Pac-12, the team that's got the talent to stand toe-to-toe with Oregon is USC. And if USC stays healthy this year and lives up to its potential, that could be a heck of a Pac-12 title game.
Phil, it's a lot of tough fun to be able to talk football with you. It's always fun. I think it's an annual conversation that we love to talk here, and we can only imagine that we hope we get football back. If we don't, we'll have a funeral here for 200 days in Tuscaloosa because that's all we talk about. So we hope, our fingers are crossed, and I hope those 12 televisions that you're staring at, every single one of them has a game, and we're able to watch football coming up here in about 50 days.
Yeah, I'm bullish. I'm thinking we're playing football this fall, Ryan, so I'm looking forward to it, and I always enjoy talking football with you, my friend.
No doubt. Phil Steele, 042. Phil Steele, 042. Phil, thank you for your time. Have a great afternoon, sir.
Thanks, Ryan. You too.